I've remarked on the library downtown a couple of times since May, since it reopened. And among the things I've remarked on is the paucity of books that it offers now compared to what it used to offer. It's not just the library downtown or in Dallas, there's another library in the northern suburb of Dallas. It's done the same thing. It is as if every bookshelf has been culled by half. Like they literally went through and eliminated half of the selection, specifically in the nonfiction. Fiction's a little different. They started doing this thing, at least in Dallas, about 2 years ago, where they started gradually increasing the representation proportionally of fiction relative to nonfiction and putting it more prominently on display. So, for instance, during the time frame when things were closed down, the parts of the library were off limits. You had to go to somebody and request they get a book and then bring it to you. But the area at the front would have a lot of fiction. As a matter of fact, all that was available for you to actually go up and look at yourself without going through the card catalog and then having to request somebody go get the book and bring it to you was the fiction. And this was going on the entire time that COVID 19 first unrolled. But because I had been to other libraries throughout the city, I knew it wasn't exclusive to COVID 19. There are certain libraries in certain areas that are disproportionately serving people of color. They had already started doing this. They had already started appealing to and trying to create a context for attraction to nonfiction, maybe biography, but mostly nonfiction, including nonfiction that had very visual covers with very visual graphic illustrations. And I noticed this, and to be honest with you, part of me was upset. Not that I don't like fiction, don't get me wrong, but there was something about it that seemed contrived and almost dangerous. I was concerned. And if you take and you try to compel people to indulge too much in visualization or fantasy, without giving them a grounding, including material fact upon which to base that which they're fantasizing about, well, then you may have a situation where you have somebody with an incredibly fertile imagination, including one that is connected to deep emotions and maybe even some kind of ancestral inheritance, may have a very strong connection to certain communities. And without a context of grounding it in fact, including fact that they can participate in as part of a living process of community, or a fact that they can actually note in time, they can ground. And you may have a situation where somebody's indulgence in fantasy or engagement in fantasy ends up being dispossessed of them. And their fantasy actually can create and reverberate, but they're completely alienated from it. And if you have a political context for understanding things, including via access to a library that has those kind of books, and you can read about the understanding historically of considerations of alienation, individual alienated from society, alienated from their own production, including intellectual production, right? And what ends up happening to them in the alienation from their thought and their fantasy when it comes to actually dealing with their political rights. And if you strip them of their political rights too comprehensively, then you also remove from them the consideration of responsibility, including sociopolitically, as well as economically. We're not just talking about engineering people into being consumers or even some form of serf type, slave type situation, but also putting people into a position where they are engaging in actions without any concept of accountability. So then what happens when sometime later down the road somebody says something to them akin to, "You're guilty"? What? Well, by virtue of your association with this national characterization, with this political subdivision, with this phenotype, you're guilty of a crime, a serious crime, including a crime that has profound implications for entire other groups of people, including ones with a national character, including ones with particular kinds of leadership paradigms and forms of social protest and political rights, including phenotypes that are different, or maybe even the same, right? And so you hear things when people talk about crime and up to and including war crime. But what I've seen, unfortunately, is something very disturbing. At the actual context for consideration of war crimes unfortunately does not take into factoring the relationship of the immunities and privileges accorded to people that are in a role as a representative of the people in government when it comes to levying charges. And because the proceeding regarding war crimes is alienated from the internal accountability of the nation state of concern, i.e., it is external actors that are assessing and evaluating the context of the crime. And so the understanding of ownership, even of your own society, wherein you repudiate a misrepresentation of you and your people as that which would allow for the proliferation of such crime, is absent. And what it ends up happening is a constant pressure to get you to defend your abuser, including in some sort of mockery of your own existence, where somehow you're supposed to perform as if you're them. Well, the accusations have been levied against this person. Now we are casting you as that person, and we're charging you with crime. Well, I mean, does it matter that the people that you are most significantly targeting with this kind of deliberate intent are people that themselves were critics internally? That people were subjected themselves to some form of internal reprisal, and so they've been selected to be the specific exemplar of why it is that we're so corrupt. Our people are corrupt. They want to talk bad about us. They want to criticize us, but if it actually came time for them to step up and be us, they wouldn't be any better than us. Would you be any better in our position? You want to accuse us of war crimes? Can you handle your people any better than you've accused us of not being able to handle our own? This kind of self-righteousness proliferates. I understand that at some point in time, nearly 10 years ago, there was an effort to bring a war crimes proceeding against the United States, to accuse the United States of war crimes for what it was doing in Afghanistan. And it was going through the United Kingdom. And it was filing these charges in a British court. And that there were other charges that were attempting to target the United States and accuse the United States of crimes. And what I've noticed and I've understood that has happened is that when these external charges are levied on the United States, that the actual intellectual authors and the people that are actually in political responsibility for making the decisions on a national level about policy implementation that impacts people in other countries, those people find other people onto whom to wave whatever the derision is. It is as if they try to defend themselves via proxy. Nobody arrests the culprit and puts them on trial for the actual charges of that profundity. Within the United States, we are constantly dealing with procedural matters related to jurisdiction and to considerations of sovereignty and immunity. And we're dealing with a global health pandemic, and nobody wants to deal with the actual implications of what waiver of sovereign immunity means in the context of endemic political corruption that unfortunately doesn't really have a tempering counterpoint internationally. And part of that is the very necessary question that any sort of political leadership has to deal with in a context such as this. You are in a situation where you are trying to represent your people and you have a need to engage in international relations, but you also understand that internally you're dealing with a corrupt regime. See, if you get elected to office somehow, magically, mysteriously, you're able to get through the election and you assume the office, including an office of somebody that you accused of being corrupt during the election. And as part of the election process, revelations are made, and then you get elected and you assume that seat yourself. Well, then this is one situation you have to contend with. But if in the course of attempting to bring awareness to political corruption in your own midst, you are incredibly dispossessed and disappeared, and yet subjected to some sort of ritual of constantly being characterized as that which you yourself levy charges against in an attempt to try to compel you to come up with a defense on their behalf. Now, how many years do you have to be subjected to this until somebody says, we are not going to accept you, trying to bring a proxy out as some sort of example of how you can command somebody else's will to serve your purpose? Unfortunately, after years of trying to get due process for myself, with an understanding now of an even greater alarm that has been sounded, at least in my world, which is that due process was denied to me for several years, while I was allowed to be subjected to completely illegal processes that are honestly not unique, but yet are. And so now we're in this situation down at the library. The books have been culled in half. They don't have the same kind of content, they also don't have the same kind of spectrum. For instance, the spiritual books, the books on faith, the books on religion. There is a much more lean representation of diversity in terms of people of faith if you just look on the library shelves now versus what was there 2 years ago. Even when it comes to standards, industrial standards, they don't have the manuals with the standards anymore. They've got some history and some old plats. There's no actual law books with the context, the historical law. And they have biography of certain people that you may or may not know about, but fewer biographies now than they had before. In the meantime, what else do they have? They have drawers with seeds in them. Actual seeds. Seeds with flowers, with food. Actual seeds that you plant in the ground. You're supposed to be able to plant them in the ground, and then they grow and they create food. Organic seeds, all kinds of seeds. And the understanding is, the hope is, at least they said when this project started about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Well, take the seeds, plant them. Once you grow the food, take some seeds from the food you've grown and put them in an envelope, put them in a bag, and bring them back. We're giving you these seeds. Take these seeds, plant them, and then when you grow some food, bring them back. There's no requirements. Technically, the seeds are free, right? They're free to the community. In the course of all of this, I've taken some seeds. I'm not going to lie. The truth of the matter is, some of the seeds they provide are actually seeds I could have actually used for my small business, including understanding that certain plants have some kind of properties connected to regeneration of soil, or helping with decomposition, or some form of bioremediation, which would have been what I would have done, right? If I had been doing something other than engaging in constant struggle for my own livelihood, hoping that somehow I'm going to make some headway through the judicial branch of government, as opposed to whatever is supposed to be the alternative in this non-legal tender sort of sequence they try to compel me to, right? I mean, these seeds are legal. It's legal tender to plant food and grow it, right? And you get the seeds. Take it back. Well, I've never seen anybody take any seeds back until recently. This past week, earlier this week. Somebody actually went back to the library with seeds. They had taken the seeds, they had grown something, they saved the seeds, and there in the drawer is a bag full of the seeds that they saved from that yield. Somebody actually did it. I don't know who it is. Maybe the guards and all of their compulsive security has it on camera, right? And I don't know what they would do with that. With all of the other data and all of the other biometric accounts they steal from people in these public facilities, while they're also culling the books in half and selectively engineering our experiences of our own biographies and histories. I don't know what they do in the back end with all that camera feed. They sure as hell don't make it available as evidence when you say you're going to need that camera feed as evidence. But somebody's got camera feed of whoever that person was, and I would like to thank them. I don't know why they did it. They did. Somehow they got those seeds and they got the food to grow, and they took the seeds and they bought them back.